All right, everybody. We'll grab your attention back up at the front. I hope you all had fun on the tours. I know I had fun on mine. Appreciate it. Um, my name is Chase Atsunasu. I'm a policy analyst with Clean Fuels Michigan. We're going to get back in, have a discussion around the transportation electrification policy roadmap that Clean Fuels Michigan helped to.
We can't really.
Oh, okay. A little bit of rearranging really quick. But yeah, transportation electrification roadmap. I know many of you are involved in the process. Clean Fuels Michigan was excited to partner with Michigan EIBC in the authoring of the report. And with me today is Justin, so go ahead and hand it off to you.
Hi, I am Justin Carpenter. I am the Director of Policy at the Michigan Energy Innovation Business Council. For those that don't know who we are, similarly to Clean Fuels, we're a trade organization, but we are kind of spread out across the advanced energy space. So we have transportation, but also, renewable generation, storage, et cetera.
Yeah, so really excited to talk a little bit about the transportation electrification policy roadmap that we worked on. The report is 150 pages in its totality, so it's quite a monstrosity. We started working on the project in January and wrapped it up just about a month ago. So a long time coming, but really excited about the list of recommendations. There's more than 25 unique policy recommendations that go through legislative opportunities in the state, but also touching on some of the executive changes and working with state agencies and the regulatory changes that can help support the transition and make sure that Michigan is meeting its transportation electrification goals. Justin, you want to talk a little bit more about kind of the process and how we built out these recommendations and where they came from?
Yeah, so I know a lot of you, I think, participated in that process, but we did kind of our own work groups within CFM and within EIBC with our own members, and then had joint calls where we have a lot of joint members, but had a lot of the members that also are not shared by our organizations together to kind of just I think identify what the industry saw as what was working around the country, what wasn't, and how Michigan could meet its policy goals. And it was just kind of a great constructive process to have everybody working together on this over the course of several months, and kind of pitching at policy ideas, going over why they worked, what was agreed on, what wasn't, and then kind of just putting it all together. I don't know.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit now about context and the importance of the report and why you spent the better part of 9 months working on it. What we know is that in Michigan, transportation-related emissions make up the largest greenhouse gas emission sector in the state. So targeting and focusing on transportation from a decarbonization standpoint is really important, particularly in line with goals that the governor and the Whitmer administration has set in the state as far as market-wide carbon neutrality by 2050, and then the goals that are outlined in the My Healthy Climate Plan related to transportation, specifically deploying 100,000 EV charging ports to support 2 million electric vehicles by 2030. But beyond the climate impacts of this transition towards decarbonizing our transportation sector, we also know that there's significant economic benefit to pursuing policies that are favorable to supporting the growth of this sector. There's been massive private investment and public investment to help support the deployment of clean vehicles and the related infrastructure. We also know that Michigan is leading in clean mobility jobs. It was the fastest growing job sector in the state in 2020, increased by 14.4%. So this is the context that we were working in, recognizing that we have these really bold goals in Michigan, but needed a more clear kind of pathway. What are the policy levers that we have at our disposal to help make sure that Michigan is leading in the transition and making progress towards those goals? If it flips, the last slide here should be, so there's a QR code over there. It takes you to our website where, again, I mentioned the full report is 150 pages, but also on our website we have a one-page kind of overview, debrief some of the policy recommendations and highlight some of these key recommendations. I'll hand it back over to Justin to talk about in a second here, but these are really the recommendations thinking through if Michigan is going to make really significant strides towards achieving our transportation electrification goals, these are our primary focus areas.
Yeah, so first off, just requiring the state to use its EV charger goal within all agency planning and evaluation criteria. Pretty straightforward. I think no shock to anybody that we're also looking at a clean fuel standard and have been working on that for some time. I think kind of given the results of last Tuesday at the federal level, I think we also are identifying that clean fuel standard is going to be especially important in the state in the coming years. Passing new legislation requiring transportation electrification planning filed as separately contested cases. I think that's also going to be something that is going to be massive in the next term. Just ensuring that we are actually building out the infrastructure that's needed and kind of giving Michigan's utilities the avenue to do that and make sure that we are building out the distribution grid to be ready for that load growth. Encouraging utilities to conduct EV load forecasting that allows for no regrets investments. Supporting the expansion of utility rebates across the board, and then adopting EV readiness provisions in the state energy conservation code. And I think just in addition to that, getting rid of some of the kind of onerous requirements within that code that have prevented some of the new builds from having like EV charging requirements built in. And I did want to just also say that I think, to address the elephant in the room that, we did have an election last week, and we are going to deal with a split legislature going into next term. And I think that the only thing that really changes on a lot of that is maybe like how we message some of these. But these are all still really vital. I mean, like I personally used to work in the Republican legislative offices, and there were a lot of Republicans who maybe outwardly spoke against electrification and everything, but also recognized it as something that was happening. It was coming, and there was work that needed to be done to address it. So I think just the bipartisan goal is really there, and I think it's just kind of how we speak with policymakers on that in the coming years. And especially on the clean fuel standard, we talk about this a lot, that the fact that it is not just electrification, that it is multiple fuels allowed, and how many kind of red districts within the state have biofuels and ethanol and whatnot. So yeah, I just wanted to touch. I don't know if you want anything more than that.
No,
but
yeah, appreciate it. Again, really excited about this project. I think this is a really major accomplishment, and want to say thank you to all of you who helped participate and provide feedback throughout this process. Again, the better part of this year was getting this report put out, and we're really excited to take action on it. Justin and I have been having really productive meetings with legislators already who are interested in tackling transportation in the next legislative session. So we're excited to put to action some of these policy priorities that we put together. So on that note, we'll transition. Justin, thank you so much for being here today. We're going to continue the policy discussion with a panel. I'll invite the panelists to come up. All right, so transitioning a little bit to our panel here, Advancing Clean Mobility with Innovative Policy. Really excited about the panelists that we have up here today, and really excited to talk to you all about not just the policies that are outlined in the Transportation Electrification Policy Roadmap, but recognizing it's an all-hands-on-deck approach, and that there are policy levers available to us to support the clean mobility sector at large, supporting other fuel types and things like that. But before we continue, I want to make sure, have some time, have our panelists introduce themselves. Quafo, since you have the mic down there, do you want to kick things off?
Sure, Chase. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. All right, we got an engaged crowd. My name is Quafo Adakwa, Director of Public Affairs for ITC's Michigan Business Unit, and I also lead our electrification efforts and serve on Clean Fuels Michigan's board for a few more weeks. I think we have a unique opportunity in front of us. Even with respect to everything that's taking place over the last couple of days in clean mobility and clean fuels. And so I'm excited to be a part of this panel, excited to listen to my esteemed colleagues talk about where we need to go from a policy perspective up in Lansing.
Angela Ayers, I'm with Ford Motor Company's State Government Affairs covering Michigan.
Thank you to Chase and to Jane for hosting us today. This is a great conversation, so thank you. So at Ford, we're obviously doing a lot in terms of our electrification space. We are the number 2 auto manufacturer for electric vehicles in the United States, second behind Tesla. We are number 2 in hybrids, second behind Toyota. We are the number 1 for electric vehicle vans, so our e-Transit is a really hot seller. And we'll talk a lot about, I think from the policy side, electrification and kind of what we're seeing as it relates to regulation, policy, consumer demand, especially with the new leadership we have both at the state and federal level. But as an auto manufacturer, we are committed to electrification. It's something that our consumers are demanding, not just in the United States, but globally. And I think a lot of people think, okay, we've got the US, we've got Michigan, but it is a global wave in terms of where we're headed, both on the consumer side and regulation. And so that's something that we are committed to. And in addition, something that we are committed to in terms of our values and the sustainability of the company. So I'm looking forward to the discussion today. Yes, we'll share.
Thank you, Angela. Thanks for having us. My name's Olivia Campbell Anderson. I am part of the ABB e-mobility team. So if you haven't heard of ABB, we manufacture electric vehicle chargers, design them, manufacture them, and maintain them. We installed our first charger way back in 2010. So that makes us one of the veteran companies in terms of EV charging technology worldwide. We have over 1 million chargers deployed, including 80,000 DC fast chargers. Our first charger that we installed in Michigan was in 2013. And it's still operating at a General Motors facility. So in Michigan, we have around 285 chargers deployed to date. And we, a lot of our chargers, we specialize in DC fast charging. So that's fast public charging for passenger vehicles, but really we do a lot of work with fleets, working with Amazon, electric school buses use our chargers, and many public transit agencies use our chargers for keeping their electric buses moving. So that's just a little snapshot of ABB, e-mobility.
I brought my own. Well, thanks, Chase. Thanks for having me here. Thank you, Jane, for having me here as well. My name's Shelby Neal. I'm the Vice President of Renewables for a company called Darling Ingredients. Darling Ingredients, we consider ourselves an agricultural company. Half of the animal makes it to your plate. The other half comes to us. So we're a rendering company, the world's largest rendering company. We also collect used cooking oil from restaurants. And once we get those products, we turn them into renewable diesel and sustainable aviation fuel. So we're the largest producer of renewable diesel in North America, as well as sustainable aviation fuel. We have about 1 billion gallons of renewable diesel capacity, and just this month, actually, we got up to 250 million gallon per year run rate on sustainable aviation fuel. So we do everything but electric. We also have a small biogas business. So when you get used cooking oil from restaurants, you get a lot of water with that material. So we have to process that, treat it before we discharge it or return it to the municipality. And so we actually take biogas or capture methane from that process, give it to a technology provider, turns it in, upgrades it into a biogas, and then they give it right back to us, and we power the plant. So we're in everything but electric, but never say never. We might get there someday.
Thank you all. I just want to say what a privilege it is to be moderating this panel. I mean, you all are really experts in the policy fields of each of the sectors that you represent, and really excited to dig into some of these topics today. Talk a little bit about how we're being innovative in our policy solutions to support the clean mobility sector here in Michigan. So talking about innovating in the policy sector, Clean Fuels Michigan, we're a state level policy shop focused on creating market opportunities via the legislature in Lansing to support the growth of each of your businesses and all of your businesses as well. One of the tools that we have at our disposal and one of the exercises that I frequently take, and I'm sure that you all, given the nature of your organizations, take, is looking at other jurisdictions that are outpacing us in our expected outcomes or our key outcomes that we're hoping to achieve in Michigan. And so thinking in the clean mobility sector, talking about clean fuel adoption in other jurisdictions and EV charging deployment and electric vehicle deployments in other states where we're being outpaced. Olivia, I might come back to you given the global nature of ABB, but I would be curious if you want to talk a little bit more about lessons we can learn from other jurisdictions that are outpacing Michigan in terms of infrastructure, electric vehicle infrastructure deployment. Are there things that we can learn and things that we can bring back to Michigan, put a Michigan spin on those things and support those policies as we look to help make sure that Michigan is leading in the transition towards vehicle electrification?
Sure. Thanks for that question, Chase. So one of the things that we've come to realize, even in the countries overseas in Europe that have are really leading the charge in terms of their adoption of electric vehicles and different transportation choices, is this quote that came to mind that no one can whistle a symphony alone, right? It takes the whole orchestra. And so when we think about policy solutions that are needed, oftentimes, recognizing that there's not one particular lever, like just because we have an incentive program, just because there's funding, or just because there's regulation, or because there's a goal or a mandate. Even in areas that in Europe and in California, it takes like all of those policy tools to help move the market and drive change and enable, access for everyone, not just certain companies or certain individuals that have the ability. So I thought I'd take us over to Europe, a couple things that are happening there that are really have transformed the market in a significant way. They have the alternative fuel infrastructure regulations where every European state or EU country has to deploy every 37 miles public charging for passenger vehicles and every 75 miles charging for freight vehicles, buses, trucks, etc. Now, they can do it in any way. There's a variety of different ways, but every country has to do this on the major thoroughfare. Otherwise, they will be penalized and face significant fines, etc. So that's one element, and we see some of that mirrored in our National Electric Vehicle Plan, but it's important to recognize that they're tackling all vehicles, in these requirements, and also the redundancy around it. Another cool thing that my colleagues shared with me over in Germany is the really advanced, what we would refer to as building codes, where if you have a facility that has 20 parking spaces or more, you are required, this is for new and existing, like retail parking areas, you're required to provide charging on the site. And for new buildings, for every 10 parking spaces, if you have 10 parking spaces as part of your non-residential, you have to have one charger for every 5 parking spaces. So it's not just make ready. That is drastically driving the market. So we're seeing supermarkets and other retail spaces that were not interested or were not providing those services that are now, very actively becoming charge point operators or contracting with partners to make that. So that building code makes a huge difference And we're getting active calls because now that they have a certain amount of time before they need to come into compliance. 2025 is the first date that they have to get at least one charger installed, and it's moving. It's making infrastructure happen on the ground. And then of course the other element is funding. Pretty much every country has funding either in the way of tax incentives or grants, ranging anywhere between 10% to Belgium was even 150% of the cost of charging infrastructure. So it's a real incentive. And they have grants too, covering up to about 70%. But they're ongoing programs. It helps to have a long-term plan, so it's not just a 1 year or get your grant application in, so that companies have time to plan for it. So there's a couple fun things that are happening over the pond, shall we say?
Yes, yeah, I know. As much as we like to think there's one silver bullet policy that'll solve all of our problems, I think the point that you made at the beginning of your point there, that it really is a group of policies and all of those policies working together, making sure that we're supporting the industry itself. I want to stick on the topic of infrastructure a little bit. Kwafo, I'm coming to you next. Talking about, we know that timely infrastructure deployment is a critical enabler of EV adoption. I'd be curious, coming back a little bit more to Michigan or maybe stateside on this side of the Atlantic, talking about what supportive policies you see to be critical to address the increased demand on electric infrastructure that we know will come as a result of increased electric vehicle adoption.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Chase. And I'm a bit parochial in my view, right? I'm a Michigander. Go green. Very good. There's always one in every crowd. So, no, with respect to what we're doing in Michigan, we're doing a lot of things right? We're not perfect, but this is Michigan. This is not California. This is not other places. There's things that are unique to our region and the way in which we have to move from a policy perspective, understanding it's a deeply purple state, right? To get things done, we have to take measured steps. We can have stretch goals, but we want to make sure we do that in a measured way. I will say from the infrastructure standpoint, ITC is the nation's largest independent electric transmission provider, so providing the backbone service, even in buildings like that we're here today on this campus, providing the infrastructure on the electric side to kind of keep powering our lives and powering what we want to do from a mobility standpoint. Right now in the regional transmission organizations, which MISO is the one for this region that we sit in right now, there's a lot of work being done, future looking ahead to not only clean electrification and clean fuels in that regard and mobility in that regard, but also what we do about all the other uses for the electric system. So MISO's long-range transmission plan has several different portfolios of projects that we're involved in that are kind of looking to interconnect and make us more robust and stronger from that perspective. And a lot of folks can be involved in that process and take a look at what's happening and the geographic map of how we're trying to continually iterate and prepare for that future that has some different optionality. And I would also say that as we think about policy initiatives, we want to be able to have, no pun intended, some off-ramps, right? Because what's a hot technology right now might not be the same technology in 5 years, and you don't want to be locked into one way of thinking as we move forward and we try to figure out, is it hydrogen today? Is it pure EV? Is it a hybrid? Is it some mix of those things? And as a business, you want to be able to have that flexibility and also some of the certainty. So I do appreciate the work Clean Fuels and EIBC has been doing with trying to develop a roadmap and have some of those stretch goals, but also being aware of the situation at hand, trying to find some policy wins that are lower hanging fruit to kind of get us to a place where we ultimately want to be.
Yeah, thanks, Kwafo. And I think it's an important part of the work when we're talking with legislators in Michigan is they don't want to be California and they don't want to be some of these other states. They want to be Michigan and we want to do it right, and we want to have policy solutions that are appropriate and right-sized for Michigan. But I want to talk a little bit about a point you made that Michigan is doing a lot of things really well. Particularly, Michigan has been really successful in drawing in private investments to make sure that we're manufacturing the vehicles of tomorrow and really leveraging the robust manufacturing base that the state already has. Automakers like Ford have announced investments to repurpose existing manufacturing and build out new manufacturing capacity to support the manufacturing of the vehicles and their components like batteries. So while Michigan has been a top state for investment, private investment for manufacturing, we're seeing a little bit of a lag in electric vehicle adoption, actually, where we're just kind of tracking along national averages. We're not lagging behind, but we're also not leading. Other states in the Midwest, like Illinois and Minnesota, continue to outpace Michigan in terms of electric vehicle adoption. And so, Angela, my question to you is, are there policies and changes that the state should be looking to make to encourage consumers to be more comfortable around the vehicles that they're going to start building and already have started building?
So very similar to what I think Olivia and Quafo have said. It isn't a silver bullet. And when you take a look at California, because I think a lot of people compare, since they are number one in terms of EV adoption rates, I mean, they've been doing this for decades, and they've invested tens and tens of millions of dollars to subsidize and to create all of these wraparound types of programs. So it's not just incentives, it's not just a mandate, it's looking at the nuances of your state and what it takes to get there. So in Michigan, sure, incentives help, on the hood always helps, but if you're looking at things like how can Michigan also be kind of walking the walk, is what is the state doing and taking a leadership role. I know we've tried to get funding in the budget each year for state fleet transition to EVs. I think looking at that would be incredibly helpful, because it's not just, it's one thing to say it, and then it's one thing to see it. And when you see the state making the investment in themselves, then I think other people are more apt to say, hey, this really works, this is important to the state, and I'm seeing these things out and about. So I think that having the state actually taking a leadership role is one thing. I think, too, as we look at the infrastructure needs, I think that is a big barrier that we hear from our customers all the time is, well, once I see the infrastructure, once there's more charging in place, I'm more apt to potentially buy an EV. So there's that fear of that range anxiety, which I think is really real. And not just on the retail side, on the commercial fleet side as well. So for businesses that we sell our vehicles to, the E-Transit, the Lightning, they're looking at, when they purchase an electric vehicle, they purchase a charger for every vehicle. So it's a 1-to-1 ratio. So if they're trying to electrify their fleets for a small business, it might be 3, 5, 10 vehicles. They need that many chargers to go in place with the vehicles that they're purchasing, which typically requires a utility upgrade, because that's a major construction. That's not just doing a grid, a small box thing you can call your electrician and do a tweak and you're good to go. It's a major construction project that you need to work with the utility, a year, 2 years in advance. So that is another, I think, opportunity, is looking at how can you solve these challenges with either working, better with utilities. Is it grant programs for businesses as well as retail customers, so people can see these things and really see the impact of what we're looking to achieve with our goals.
Yeah. Thank you for that point, Angela. Shelby, coming to you next. A lot of discussion on transportation, electrification, but what we do know, again, talking about some of the statewide goals, Governor Whitmer's goal of having statewide carbon neutrality by 2050, it really is an all-hands-on-deck approach to transportation decarbonization, and it's going to require more than just a focus on transportation electrification. We know that biofuels are an essential piece to solving the clean mobility puzzle, and particularly in areas that we consider to be difficult to electrify. And so I'd like to ask you, how you see biofuels and biodiesel maybe specifically working in tandem with vehicle electrification to support the state's transportation decarbonization goals, and are there sectors that you see specifically where biofuels and biodiesel, sustainable aviation fuel, taking a key role to support the state's efforts towards a carbon neutral state?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I think, just an overarching point is, I think in general, the last couple of years, people become very, sort of parochial, very opinionated, willing to tell you what their opinions are. And so it's, and sort of an integrated thought model, perhaps. It's very much, this is the way I think, this is what I support. So you may have a biofuel supporter who hates electric vehicles. You may have an electric vehicle supporter who hates any biofuels, and this is very much a wrong way of thinking. As you noted, this is a huge problem. I mean, I don't think that we even understand the scope of this problem that we have caused. I mean, if you look at even the recent news of what's going on with the ice. We're losing ice and snowpack at a level we're just now beginning to understand the consequences of it. So we can't electrify our way out of it in the next decade. And so we have to say, okay, what are all of our options to decarbonize? And so that's where we fit in. On the biomass-based diesel side, which is biodiesel, renewable diesel, and sustainable aviation fuel, we really view ourselves as focusing on the hardest to decarbonize sectors, the most difficult sectors. So when we think about electrification, light duty works great. I have an electric vehicle, love it. We'll never go back to an ICE engine if I have a choice. But when you think about class 6 through 8 trucks, these are like the big rigs on the road. They're extremely heavy. You have labor rules about how long they can drive. If you were to electrify those in the very near term, even if it were possible from a manufacturing perspective and so on, it would be a tremendous inefficiency in the system, and we would all pay for that. So that's a very obvious use case for renewable diesel. Similarly, airplanes. We're not going to electrify those anytime soon. So what's better than doing nothing? Petroleum, sustainable aviation fuel, where we get 80% greenhouse gas reduction emissions. But some medium and heavy duty sort of things like transit buses often come up, school buses. Outstanding application for electrification for a wide variety of reasons. One, people don't weigh very much. They don't take up very much space relative to freight. They have very predictable routes. Have a lot of planning involved. So I guess my point is you really have to look at the various use cases and say, okay, what is the best application from, say, now for the next 10 years, and how can we optimize that, knowing that there are feedstock constraints in biofuels. There are similarly constraints related to electric vehicles and manufacturing and batteries and so on and so forth. So everything has a natural constraint, which is why we need everything, for sure, in the next 10 years. After that, we'll see how it goes. But we do see electrification and the pace of that continuing to increase. It wasn't, if I'm being completely candid, 10 years ago, I was sort of making fun of electric vehicles as sort of like these glorified golf carts because they really weren't amazing. Now I drive one myself and I would never go back. So that's why I say 10 years on is going to be different, but right now, the next 10 years is fairly predictable, and biofuels, renewable diesel, biodiesel, sustainable aviation fuel have a very important role to play by reducing carbon by, on average, 75%.
Yeah, thanks, Shelby. I want to go ahead and transition us just a little bit. Having a panel discussion on policy, I'd be remiss if we didn't discuss the election that took place last week. I think in the aftermath of the election, there's some hesitancy in the clean mobility sector, specifically concerns, about the Republican control of Congress and the reinstatement of the Trump presidency, hesitation that there could be rollbacks on federal programs that have been supporting the industry, and then again, bringing things back to Michigan with the Republicans taking control of the House, concerns around a gridlock legislature potentially, with the Republicans controlling one chamber, Democrats controlling the other, and again, continuing with Governor Whitmer in the executive office. In spite of all that, I think it's important to recognize the points that you all have brought up about things that remain true. Angela, you brought up the point that Ford and other automakers remain committed to transitioning towards electric vehicles. The product cycle will outlast an election cycle. Ford has made commitments, General Motors. And we also see electric vehicle adoption continuing to grow among consumers. So we know consumer demand remains for vehicle electrification. We also know that Michigan has a storied automotive legacy and that decision makers from local leadership all the way up to the federal government are really interested in keeping Michigan at the forefront of the transition towards clean mobility and making sure that we're continuing to be leaders and innovators in the automotive sector. So the question I'd like to pose to the group is how you think this legacy of automotive excellence, automotive innovation in Michigan can continue to push us to lead on innovative clean mobility policies, and how can we leverage our industry expertise, workforce, infrastructure to continue to lead on the transition towards clean mobility.
Everyone's staring at me, so I guess I'll start. So as Chase said, and this comes from the top, I've heard Bill Ford say it, I've heard Jim Farley say it, production cycles are longer than any election cycle. So we are committed to the products that our consumers want. And this is a global mandate. And we are a global company. Electrification is our future. The question, I think, is how far, how fast, what does it look like? It's kind of like that details, the how, what, when, what. We know what we're doing. It's kind of the how we're going to get there. And then when we take a look at concerns at the federal level, some of the things that we've been talking about are nothing's going to happen overnight. So if there is some kind of rollback or there's an impact on the Inflation Reduction Act or California waiver, it's not going to happen overnight. There might be court challenges, there might be things that happen over time, but we are still producing the vehicles that our customers want and when they want them. We have seen tremendous growth in hybrids this year. Even in each quarter of 2024, we've seen over 30% growth in the hybrid segment. We have 3 hybrids right now. We have the Maverick, which is a small pickup truck. We have the F-150 hybrid, and then we have the Escape. We launched the Ford, oh my God, what am I saying? In Europe.
The Explorer?
Yes, Explorer. I'm like, too many E's. I'm like, oh my gosh, too many E's. We launched the Ford Explorer hybrid in Europe. We're hoping to bring that stateside in the future. We'll have many more options to look at. And one thing that you said too is EV growth. And I want to talk about that as it relates to Michigan for just a moment. So bring us back to 2019. I think nationally we were at 1.9% EV market share. So of every new vehicle sold, 1.9% across the country were EVs. There were 19 EV models available in the US. 2022, so in 3 years, you had almost 100 EV models available, and you saw tremendous growth. It was 5.9%. That was the big jump. When everyone said, oh, EVs are great, we're selling a ton, we all started projecting from 2022. That's when we launched, the Lightning, the Mach-E. You had a lot of stuff available. Everyone was really excited. 2023 was about 7.8%. So still a lot of growth. It just was smaller than everyone thought. 2024, we have 117 models available, and we're at almost 10%. So in 5 years, you go from 19 models to 117, 1.9% EV market share to 10%. I still think that's a lot of growth. That's what our customers are asking for. And as we look at Michigan in particular, the top 2 counties that are purchasing EVs are Washtenaw County, so around the Ann Arbor area, and Oakland County, highest populated county in the state. The top 7 counties for EV purchases in Michigan all went for Biden in 2020. So when you talk about the impact of who, the politicization of EVs, who your EV customer is, all of this kind of interplays. And with Michigan being a purple state, I think you need to listen to your customer, and then you also have to be aware. And for us, it's product of choice. We have ICE vehicles, we have hybrids, we have EVs, we have something for everybody across the market share.
I mean, the only thing I would add, it's really not much more to add, but that was really from listening from one of the OEMs talking about this topic. Is your executive leadership is totally right. These business decisions are going to outlive any sort of election cycle or any of those things. The customers, in varying degrees, have kind of already spoken with what they want to do in this venture. Your premise of your question was what we can do as a state to kind of continue our culture of kind of automotive research and that stuff. We have great research universities. We have so many engineers in this state, so many researchers, so many, all of the big 3 are here. We have a lot of that rich history that we just need to kind of continue to invest in. Being on this campus right now is beautiful. It's part of that investment, part of that legacy of being sort of forward thinking. And I think we have the tools in place. We have a supportive government. Even with a change, I think if you talk to the people in Lansing, they're going to be supportive of having Michigan still be a leading industry, driver for automotive. And so I think all the things are in place to kind of continue on the path we have historically. Do we have to be cognizant of changes afoot? Yes. Do we have to understand what the public is telling us? Yes. But I still think there's a rich tradition here. There's a lot of talent here. There's a lot of reasons to be in Michigan. And so I think we're well positioned moving forward to have a future with automotive at the center. So.
Yeah, lots of cautious optimism, I would say. I think moving forward, I think, Kwafo, to your point, legislators in Michigan seem to be relatively open to the idea that of this highly politicized issue, because we know it's not just environmental in Michigan, it's inherently economic, it's tied to the state's workforce, and the future success of the state is tied to the success of the auto sector in the entire supply chain. So really excited to continue working on policy issues that continue to support the growth of the sector. I want to take a moment to highlight some of the successes we had in this current legislative session. So over the past 2 years, we've been successful in clarifying electricity pricing related to EV charging station that allowed Michigan to access the $110 million for the NEVI charging stations and start deploying those dollars. Construction is underway in Lansing for the first NEVI charging station, so really excited about that. We passed legislation that clarified EV semi-truck weight exemptions for electric semi-trucks, recognizing that EV batteries increase the weight of a vehicle, and so providing a modest exemption for electric semi-trucks really breaks down some of the barriers for those vehicles and allows for continued growth in that sector. And we secured EV charging protections for homeowners and that live in HOAs, making sure that HOA bylaws are not able to prohibit the installation of EV chargers. So over the past 2 years, breaking down barriers, ensuring that EV drivers have access to adequate infrastructure, and continue to support efforts in that front from a funding perspective, Olivia, to your point. But I want to talk about a point that Kwafo made earlier, that this industry is rapidly changing and technology develops, it seems, instantaneously. Walking through the innovative spaces here, learning about all the new technologies that are being developed, and working in policy, I'm sure all of you know that policy in the bureaucratic process tends to be slow, and statute tends to be relatively rigid. And so I want to talk about, how can we work to make Michigan policies that are flexible enough to accommodate future technology advancements, but still provide stability and clear direction for all of your businesses, to signal to industry that Michigan is wanting to lead and push the envelope on the clean mobility.
One area that's been really good, and to add on, I don't think you talked about the funding that was secured for charging infrastructure for medium and heavy duty and all other fleets as well. That was a critical success that we'll look forward to working with Eagle on implementing. But when we have those types of programs, recognizing that there's in the transportation space, there's no one size fits all solution, particularly once you get beyond the residential space, we're looking at fleets and medium and heavy duty. So I think having flexibility and giving the agencies flexibility to recognize that as they are developing these programs is really important. And the state's done a good job with that, and hopefully we could, continue doing that. And that would apply as well to our utility programs. I think looking to keep flexibility, but making sure that they're a little bit more long-term, because we know that, it takes a while to get, there's an education level, then there's a comfort level, and then there's an actual planning and implementation level for shifting the technologies that are used. And so recognizing that it takes a while to get past those early adopters, and giving businesses and local governments time to do that planning, I think is also important. So that's why I think the utility partnerships and some of the recommendations that you talked about earlier around transportation, electrification plans, grid planning, and then having more clear opportunities for the medium and heavy duty space are important going ahead.
Well, I think as we discussed earlier, the climate problem is a big problem. It's a global problem. It's a huge problem, and so if you're going to conquer a big problem, you need a big policy. And talking about action is not the same thing as action. So in other words, we need a sense of urgency around this, or we're all going to. I live in Texas, so I may be beach property here before too long. So we've got to have a big lever because we got a big problem, and I think the premise of your question is right. How do we have both certainty, but also encourage innovation and conquer this in a cost-efficient way that grows jobs? How do we do all of those things simultaneously? And so I think what you do is you say, what's government really good at, and what is the private sector really good at? And I hate to bring it up, but California has done the best policy I have ever seen in my 25-year professional career is the low carbon fuel standard, the clean fuel standard. California has one, Oregon, Washington, British Columbia, now New Mexico. And the reason I say that is the government sets up the rules. You know, we're going to have guardrails around feedstocks and co-pollutants, but we're going to set this target. We want a greenhouse gas reduction. Last year they reduced greenhouse gases by 15%, and we're going to say these people, these obligated parties, are responsible for doing this, but then they have choices about how they do it. And then that's where the private sector kind of plugs in and says, okay, we're all going to compete to do the best possible job at the lowest possible price. And so you might think, well, that's a recipe for disaster. Somebody's going to dominate, and it's going to be the least impressive environmental outcome. It's a race to the bottom. Not at all. I mean, when you look at the low carbon fuel standard since its inception in 2011, California leads in everything, literally everything. And the LCFS is the major lever for that. It's the most sustainable aviation fuel, the most renewable diesel, the most biodiesel, and the highest rate of electrification. Electrification increased from 13% of credit generation to 25% of credit generation just last year alone. So it doesn't have to be the same everywhere. Every state is unique and should put its stamp on it. But I think it's critically important to really look at and understand all of these policies and to learn from them and to act when you have an opportunity to act. You mentioned the federal, the IRA at the federal level. There was a Democrat, trifecta for about 30 minutes. There's been another one here. And so when you have those opportunities, you got to go. You can't have stakeholders sit around and argue, and Jane's been amazing at bringing people together. You got to go. And so what happens with the IRA? We do a lot of federal work. Well, those IRA jobs are good jobs, and they're not just in Democrat districts, they're also in Republican districts. And so once you get something in, it does tend to stick. So anyway, I'll stop there, but I think a clean fuel standard would be a brilliant way to go. It would address about 80% of the needs with one single policy.
Yeah, really excited to continue our work on advocating for a clean fuel standard in Michigan and continuing into the next legislative session. Agreed. I think it's a major opportunity not only to bring a diverse group of stakeholders together, but also to tackle a lot of the issues that are in the transportation decarbonization sector in a way that allows industry to continue to innovate. Brushing on one of my last questions that I have for you all, the governor has set forward in the My Healthy Climate Plan really ambitious goals for transportation decarbonization. We talked about it briefly, Justin and I, having 100,000 EV charging ports in the state to support 2 million electric vehicles by 2030. Super ambitious target, something that we're really excited to continue to work towards and build towards to continue to support the growth of the sector in that direction. But would be curious to hear your thoughts on the role that the government continues to play in setting those ambitious targets. Shelby, if you have thoughts about that, does it help to have targets from a sustainable aviation fuel and from a biofuel perspective? And if you all can talk a little bit more about how private sector can work in tandem with public sector to support the achievement of these goals.
Okay, I guess I'll start. There's other, to Shelby's point, there's practices. I won't necessarily say best practices, but there's practices from around the country, around the world that we can use onshore and bring them here to Michigan without question. The thought always has to be what is doable, what is feasible, what is reasonable. I think where the private sector intersects in there is to be a conduit for information to kind of educate policymakers with term limits that we have, like in our state. That's a constant battle that has to be fought with educating folks about what's happening, what the new technologies are, why it makes sense for your red district, your blue district, whatever color district you have, and trying to, meet them where they are at and try to give them an understanding. So I think that's where the private sector intersects with that. The big thing, and I know we were talking about this beforehand, from a policy perspective, is at the state level, at that macro level, setting a target and sticking with that. And again, I think we discussed it on this panel, also practicing that target. So if you set a target of whatever that number is, state-owned vehicles, state-owned mandates, following along, because it does send a signal to the broader populace. And so making sure we have flexible policies, policies that give a guidepost for us in the private sector to attain and to move towards, and to do that in a way that's measured, and it's not whipsaw. Doesn't change from administration to administration. That's pretty constant, because that's how we make investment. That's how I know others on the panel make investment. We have to have that kind of nice runway to make sure what we're investing in, because they live for multiple decades. What we're investing in makes sense and can stand the test of time.
I'll add to that. I completely agree with what you said, and we think about it as like a Venn diagram of, it's good to have regulations to nudge in the right direction and to have goals that you are working to achieve, and then you have the reality side, the customer demand. What are where are they purchasing these vehicles? How can we implement them? And then you have the goals of the company. So how do all three kind of line up to make sure you're meeting those goals? And then you need to have the ability to adjust at the same time, where if you look at, okay, we're trying to electrify the state fleet, but you're surveying where all your state employees are driving, and maybe 90% of the ones in the western Upper Peninsula aren't really going to work out. Okay, well, we need to adjust. And how do you make goals that are achievable, that meet the needs on the ground, and then do you have the product to actually supply and fulfill those goals? That's what we're working with now.
Yeah, I think, though, without having goals goals are nice, but I prefer to have a little more teeth behind it, and binding type of commitments. But if you don't have those in place, you don't know where you're going, and so it creates uncertainty. Our electric utilities, our businesses, everyone needs certainty, because to know where we're going to go, and so that we are not trying to skate to where the puck is, but skate to where the puck is going to go to be successful. And right now, we have a situation where if we don't do that planning work, we won't ever be able to get to where we want the puck to go, because some of our timelines, think about energization timelines. When we think about electrifying the medium and heavy duty sector, some of our customers we get here that they have their vehicles and they have the chargers, but they can't start rolling because they're waiting 6 months, a year to get power access. And knowing that utilities need certainty to make those types of investments. And so without the information and without the certainty that often I think is best provided in state law and codification of, this is where we're going to go, so we know that this is the law that we're all working towards, and then everyone can figure out the best ways to do that. But without that certainty, it's really difficult to make those investments, and so you'll never actually end up meeting the puck, especially when we think about, you're looking at 5 years, 10 years if you need a new substation built. That's not something that can be done in a short time frame, yet we may have fleets that are ready to electrify and they need 5 to 30 megawatts of power within a year. So trying to help align our timelines, and we can't do that if we don't have clear goals and commitments to work towards for all the sectors, not just light duty passenger vehicles.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. We have one of the largest fleets in the country, and we've started electrifying, and it's not like you just put it in an order. There's a lot that goes into it, and it takes several years to do it. So I completely agree with that. You asked about sustainable aviation fuel. My general rule is, let's shoot for big policies that address a whole lot of 80% of the issue, but there are certain situations that call for specific type policies. So maybe when I bought my car, my EV, I think it was more of like what the hell, I'll try it kind of thing, you know? And so I decided to lease it, and I think a lot of people are like that. So what is it that gets them over that sort of little hurdle there? Is it a cash on the hood or something? So maybe that's sort of a very specific use case that deserves a narrow policy. Just an example. But in our case, aviation fuel. Aviation, people probably don't realize, but aviation fuel is not very clean. So diesel fuel, you think about it, is limited by EPA to 15 parts per million sulfur, 15 ppm. Sulfur is what causes the black smoke. It's the big nasty, as we call it. But aviation fuel is not limited to 15 parts per million. It's limited to 15,000 parts per million. So it's much dirtier. Aviation fuel is also much more difficult to manufacture for obvious reasons. You know, you have to manufacture it to negative 40 degrees Celsius. You can't make mistakes. Can't have anything impurities in it. So it's much more expensive. So that's an area where maybe some sort of specific targeted incentive to make sure that we have sustainable aviation fuel that dramatically reduces co-pollutants and greenhouse gases gets manufactured. Now, to be honest, the problem with that type of thing is the government is not very good at determining what the right level of that incentive is. If you give too much, then you've over-incentivized businesses, but if you don't give enough, then you're not getting what you wanted. So that's kind of why a lot of times I revert back to the clean fuel standard, because the market's setting the price. But again, like a SAF program, a modest one, would be highly beneficial.
Great. All right, I want to keep us honest on time, but I want to wrap up with one more quick question for each of you. Again, sticking on the topic of goals, we have the goals that are outlined in the My Healthy Climate Plan set for 2030. As we approach mid-decade very rapidly, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on if you could describe your vision for Michigan's clean mobility landscape by 2030. I think we know the goals that are set in the My Healthy Climate Plan are very ambitious, and while we hope to achieve them, I'd be curious to hear from from each of your perspectives, what you envision the clean mobility landscape looking like in 5 years' time.
I think what's scary is that it's only
Well, no one
5
even
years
predicted
away.
the last election 2 weeks ago. So 5 years from now, it's really difficult to figure out where we're going to be. But like I said before, we're on a trajectory of growth, and it's really about, well, you know, where each year, how are we going to get there and how much it's going to grow. So I see the electrification space, you know, from my perspective, really continuing to grow. We're going to have a lot, you're going to have a lot more models and variations of vehicles out there. We are also looking in the hydrogen space. I think it's a very exciting time to be in the clean mobility space. Nowhere in the history of the inception of the transportation vehicle has the industry changed so much in such a short amount of time. So I'm really excited to see where we're at. Michigan is still going to be at the center of that. We're going to have a lot of interesting policies in place that will help us to continue to get there. You have mobility ecosystems like this, where we're at right now, which will continue to grow and add to that, from everything from small to medium to large. And so I'm just excited to see where we go.
Well, I thought Kamala Harris was going to win, so I don't know if you want to listen to me. But I think the way I would answer the question is the state, in terms of biodiesel, renewable diesel, and sustainable aviation fuel, can be whatever it wants to be. If it wants to be a leader, then it will be, because all of the basic elements you need to produce those are here. The state's number 12 in soybeans, it's number 12 in corn, it's number 10 in number of restaurants of any other state. It's top 5 in 2 forms of animal agriculture production. It's number 6, I think, in eggs. So all of those come along with feedstocks. It also has commercial hydrogen. So all of the things you would need for biofuels, you have. It's really just a matter of, is there a will to do the policy that supports that? Or is there a preference that somebody else does it?
I think when you ask that question, I immediately am going to the changes that individuals are going to experience. So I'm thinking that there's going to be a dramatic reduction in asthma, particularly for children, because in 5 years, there's no reason that any school district should not be operating electric school buses. And so the exposure to air pollution for children is going to drop dramatically. I think also we're going to see more of the younger generations staying in state because there's greater economic opportunity, because Michigan is more economically competitive, particularly globally, because if we don't become that way, then there are not going to be the economic opportunities for the future. I also think that there's going to be many children who will actually never drive a gas vehicle. My daughter is one of them, and it's really exciting to think about the changes that our children are going to get to experience. They won't, there'll be workers, landscaping crews who are using all electric lawnmowers and all electric leaf blowers. And so there's going to be a reduced need for hearing aids. Like, people literally will be able to breathe cleaner and hear each other. So thinking about those types of opportunities, I think that's what transportation electrification means and will give us in the future. There's just a couple of examples.
Where do we go in the next 10 years? Yeah, the guess would be pretty ridiculous to try to make a guess based on what we just saw the last 7 or 10 days. What I can say is, if Michigan's a stock, I'm bullish on the stock. We have what we need as a state, from a resource standpoint, from technological standpoint, from young people, from a lot of things, from an environment, from a business climate. I think is pretty constructive. I think we have a lot of what we need to move us into the future. It's just a matter of not being afraid of incrementalism. It's okay to go a little bit slower than other regions, but with a big picture in mind. And I think if we look 5 or 10 years from now, we're going to look back amazed at the strides made in clean fuels, the strides made in electrification, the strides made in mobility, and how people just move about our state. Is going to change probably dramatically over the next 10 years. There are always going to be, the ethos of the automotive kind of center. That's what we're kind of founded on. But I think as we look forward in the future, I'm really bullish on Michigan. I think it's going to be there's going to be people moving back here for what this state has to offer.
Yeah, I love how you put that, bullish on Michigan. I think, to Shelby's point, we have all the right ingredients, and we're really excited to put those pieces of the puzzle together to support the growth of the clean mobility sector at large, up and down the supply chain, work with all of you on these important policy levers that we have available to us to ensure that Michigan continues to lead in the clean mobility space. With that, I really appreciate the time. If you all will help me thank our panelists for their time here today.
Thank you.
Nice job. Thank you, panelists, and awesome job, Chase. I have just a few closing remarks. The panel really summed it up. There's a lot of really amazing work happening, and I'm so excited to continue innovating with all of you. Before we close, I want to announce one new resource that we published this week. It's our Clean Mobility Dashboard. This dashboard, which you can find at the QR code here, is a space where we are going to continue populating data to show how we're progressing toward our clean mobility goals in Michigan. So we have data on EV adoption, clean school bus deployment in Michigan, how many jobs we're expecting in the clean mobility workforce over the coming years. And then in each of our pillars, robust infrastructure, affordable clean vehicles, and capable workforce, we have that data alongside the policies that will be needed to get us to those stretch goals. So the idea here is that we're providing context for where we're going, we're showing data on our progress to get there, and then highlighting some of both those stretch policies and those very pragmatic near-term policies that we should be pursuing together to help us reach those goals. Here's a snapshot of what that looks like. I encourage you to check it out and let us know what's missing and what else might be helpful. It's going to continue to be a work in progress. We'll send it out to everyone tomorrow, but this is your first look at it as our event attendees. And so we're really excited to use this as a resource and a policy tool going forward. 3 things that I heard today that I want to plus up. Amazing, amazing remarks from everyone, but 3 things that I found to be really salient and that hit me. When Mark was talking about Michigan Central and he said, people have these giant smiles going inside, it's the happiest place on earth. I love that we have our own Michigan Disney World. How cool, right? People who live in Metro Detroit and grew up in the auto industry and around the auto industry, like, that's our Disney World, going in and seeing this building that is a space for the next frontier of the auto industry. How exciting. The second, Olivia, I loved the kind of anecdote around a symphony, and we need a symphony of policies, and we also need a symphony of voices and collaborators, and I'm so honored to be in symphony with everyone that's in this room. And then I also loved how Kwafo talked about, we need our bold North Star policies, and we need to be really pragmatic on the journey to get there. And I think that's really core to what Clean Fuels Michigan does. And so I'm really excited to be in Symphony in our Disney World, doing our pragmatic but also bold work with you all. So let's keep innovating together. Give us feedback on the event today and our work in general. We're really excited about what we have in store through the end of this year and for next year. Thank you for being here. If anyone wants to continue networking, we're going to walk over to Grandma Bob's, and there's some space at the bar there. Otherwise, thank you. Get home safe. I appreciate you being here. Appreciate your partnership.